You have 12 minutes, Emily. 12 minutes to make this right, or I start making calls. And trust me, sweetheart, you do not want me making calls. He said it soft. That was the worst part. Not yelling, not threatening, just quiet, certain and cold the way a man speaks when he has never once been told no. Emily Carter stood in her own diner in her dead father's apron and felt the walls close in. Then she looked down at the greasy receipt in her hand and she picked up a pen. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow every part until the very end. And drop a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The clock above the pie case had been running 3 minutes slow for 6 years. Emily Carter knew this because her father, Gerald Carter, had always said he'd fix it, and he never did. Every Thursday night closing shift, she'd look up at that clock and adjust the real time in her head the way she adjusted everything in her life quietly, without complaint, without asking anyone for help. Tonight, the clock read 11:44, which meant it was actually 11:47, which meant Victor Kane had just cut her time down to 12 minutes. She stood with her back against the kitchen door, her order pad pressed flat against her stomach like she was trying to hold her insides together. The diner was nearly empty. 2 truckers in the back booth, both of them half asleep over coffee. Old Pete Rafferty, who came in every night just to have somewhere to sit, dozed in the corner with his baseball cap over his face. And at the far end of the counter, the last stool, the one closest to the window, the biker sat with his black coffee and his slice of apple pie, same as every Thursday. He hadn't looked up once. Victor Kane stood in the middle of the diner like he owned it, because as far as he was concerned, he almost did. He was not a large man. That surprised people who met him for the first time. They expected someone who looked like a threat. Instead, Victor Kane was slim 50s, silver at the temples, with a smile that almost reached his eyes. He wore a pressed shirt. He smelled faintly of something expensive. He looked like the kind of man who volunteered at charity auctions and coached Little League on weekends. He was not that man. Emily. He said her name the way you say a word you've said so many times it's lost all meaning. Flat. Practiced. I've been more than patient. You know that. She swallowed. Victor, I told you, I need more time. The books won't close positive until... That's not my problem. It's my father's diner. It was your father's diner. He tilted his head just slightly. Now it's collateral, and the clock is ticking. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab him by that pressed shirt and drag him through the front door and tell him exactly what she thought of his patience and his paperwork and his polished shoes. She wanted to call the police and call a lawyer, call someone, anyone. But she had tried that. She had tried all of it. The lawyer she'd contacted 3 months ago had reviewed the documents Victor's company provided and gone very quiet before telling her apologetically that the transfer language was airtight. The local deputies she'd spoken to, a nice enough man named Hargrove, had explained carefully that this appeared to be a civil matter and there wasn't much law enforcement could do. Her bank had denied her loan request twice. And her phone, her actual phone, was sitting in the office in the back, where Victor's associate, a stocky man named Dennis, who hadn't said a single word all evening, was standing with his arms crossed. 12 minutes. She looked at the 2 truckers. They hadn't moved. Old Pete was still asleep. And then without really deciding to, her eyes moved to the biker at the end of the counter. His name was Cole Maddox. She knew this because he'd once paid with a credit card and she'd seen it. Beyond that, she knew that almost nothing, only that he came every Thursday, ordered the same thing, tipped 20% exactly, and left without saying much beyond thank you. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, she guessed, big through the shoulders. His jacket carried a Hell's Angels patch that she tried not to stare at the first few times he came in because she'd grown up being told what that meant and wasn't sure she believed all of it anymore. He had never caused a single problem. Not once, Vos. He sat now with both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, looking out the window at the dark Montana highway. He wasn't watching her. He wasn't watching Victor. He seemed for all the world like a man at peace with his Thursday night. But something made Emily look at him. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the particular clarity that comes when every other option is gone. Maybe it was something she couldn't name and never would be able to. She reached under the counter and tore a receipt from the paper roll. She uncapped her pen. She pressed the paper flat against the laminate surface and wrote 2 words. Just 2. Her hand was shaking so badly the letters came out crooked and ugly. Save me. She folded the paper once, walked the length of the counter, set it down beside his coffee cup without a word. And then she walked back to the kitchen door, pressed her back against it, and watched. Cole Maddox set down his mug. He picked up the folded paper. He opened it slowly, the way a man opens something he's been half expecting. He read it. He was still for 3, maybe 4 seconds. Then he stood up. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded bill, left it on the counter beside his unfinished opapa, and walked toward the door. He didn't look at Emily. He didn't look at Victor. He didn't speak. He just walked out. The bell above the door rang once. Emily felt something collapse inside her chest. She'd been wrong. Of course she'd been wrong. He was a stranger. He owed her nothing. He had a life of his own and problems of his own, and whatever she had imagined in that one desperate moment was just the stupid hope of a woman who had run completely out of road. Victor glanced at the door, then back at her. He smiled, the real one, the one without warmth. 11 minutes, he said. She thought about her son. Caleb was 6. He had his grandfather's ears, which stuck out just slightly and had always made Gerald Carter look perpetually surprised. Caleb was sleeping right now at her neighbor Linda's house across town, tucked under the Spider-Man blanket. He refused to sleep without completely unaware that the diner his grandfather had built with 20 years of double shifts and tired hands was about to be taken by a man in a pressed shirt who called it collateral. Gerald Carter had opened this diner in 1987. He'd saved for 9 years to do it. He'd poured concrete himself on weekends. He'd wired the lights with help from his brother. He'd hand-painted the sign out front, Carter's Diner, in big, careful letters that had faded over the decades to something softer and more beautiful than the original. He'd died 11 months ago. Lung cancer stage 4, discovered late because he'd kept saying he was fine. He was fine, he was fine. He had left Emily the diner. He had also left behind boxes of paperwork. She hadn't finished sorting an espresso machine that hadn't worked since 2019 and buried in a filing cabinet. She'd only opened twice a set of business documents she hadn't understood and had set aside for later. Later had come at her like a freight train. 3 months after Gerald's funeral, a man in a pressed shirt had come through the door and introduced himself as a representative of Meridian Capital Solutions. He'd explained with the calm of someone explaining something very simple to someone very slow, that her late husband, ex-husband, she'd corrected her voice going, cold, Ryan Mercer had entered into a business arrangement with Meridian Capital 6 years ago, using Gerald Carter's Diner as a secondary collateral anchor in exchange for a private loan. The arrangement included a clause buried in page 18 of a 42-page document that transferred liability to the property's inheritor in the event of the original borrower's disappearance or incapacity. Ryan had been gone for 4 years. Emily had tried to explain that she'd had no knowledge of this, that she hadn't signed anything, that Ryan had forged documents before it had come up in their divorce proceedings briefly before he had vanished and rendered the whole proceeding moot. Victor Kane had listened politely and said, "That's a matter for the courts, Ms. Carter." And then he'd started coming to the diner. 9 minutes, Victor said. Dennis by the office door shifted his weight. Emily was so focused on not falling apart that she almost didn't hear the sound at first. It started low, a vibration more than a sound, the kind of thing you feel in your sternum before your ears register it. The coffee in Victor's cup on the nearest table rippled just slightly, the way water ripples in a glass when something large is moving nearby. Then it grew. Old Pete Rafferty woke up. He lifted the brim of his baseball cap and looked around with the confusion of a man trying to determine if he'd dreamed something. Then his eyes went to the window. Then they went very wide. The 2 truckers in the back booth were both sitting up now. Victor frowned. He turned toward the window. The sound had become a roar, not chaotic, not random. It had structure and weight and rhythm. Dozens of engines moving together, slowing together, arriving together. White light flooded through the windows. Headlights. So many headlights that the interior of Carter's Diner went from dim to blazing in under 4 seconds, as if someone had thrown a switch and turned on the sun. Victor Kane walked slowly to the window. He looked out. Emily, without thinking, followed. She counted, tried to count, and lost track somewhere around 40. They filled the parking lot. They lined the highway's shoulder in both directions. They blocked the service road running alongside the kitchen. They wrapped around the diner the way a fist wraps around something it means to hold. 120 motorcycles. Engines idling now low and steady, the sound of something patient and certain. Every headlight aimed at the diner. Victor said nothing for a long moment. Then, "What is this?" Emily said nothing. She couldn't. She had no words for what was happening. She had written two desperate words on a piece of paper and handed them to a stranger, and the stranger had walked out into the Montana night and somehow summoned a small army. She heard the door open behind her. She turned. The man who came through it was not Cole Maddox. Cole Maddox was behind him, standing just inside the doorway, arms at his sides, watching. The man who came in first was older, barrel-chested, gray-bearded, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who had spent decades being the largest thing in any room. His jacket was worn in a way that spoke of years, not fashion. His eyes, dark, steady, entirely calm, found Victor Kane immediately and stayed there. He crossed the diner floor in 8 steps. He stopped 3 feet from Victor Kane and looked at him the way you look at a problem you've already solved. "Jackson Ward," he said by way of introduction. He didn't extend his hand. "People call me Grizzly." Victor squared his shoulders. Carefully. "I'm in the middle of a private business." "No," Jackson Ward said, quiet. "Matter of fact, you're not." Victor's jaw tightened. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a legal proceeding. I have documentation. I don't doubt it." Jackson Ward glanced briefly over his shoulder at the window, at the wall of headlights beyond it, then back to Victor. "Man like you always has documentation. That's how men like you work. You don't break anything. You just bend it so far that other people break." The diner was absolutely silent except for the low, steady breath of 120 engines outside. "You picked the wrong woman to corner," Jackson Ward said. Not loud, not as a threat, as a statement of fact, the way a man states something that has already happened and cannot be undone. Victor Kane, who had spent 20 years making small business owners fold, who had survived 3 regulatory investigations, who had refined the art of legal intimidation to something close to science, looked out the window at the wall of lights. And for the first time that Emily could see, something moved behind his eyes, something that looked very much like fear. Dennis, the stocky man by the office door, had produced a phone at some point and appeared to be trying to make a call. He looked up frustrated. "I've got no signal." "Yeah," Cole Maddox said from the doorway, speaking for what felt like the first time all night. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Victor turned back to Jackson Ward. He was composing himself. Emily could see it, the practice reset of a man used to adjusting mid-confrontation. "You understand that what you're doing here is—" "I understand a woman is scared," Jackson Ward said. "I understand a man put her in a position where she felt scared on her own property, in her own business, in her own diner that her father built. And I understand that 120 people outside this building drove a long way tonight because they heard that was happening." He paused. "So I'm going to ask you once politely to take your friend and leave. Whatever paperwork you've got, whatever legal arrangement you think you have, that's for courts and lawyers and daylight hours. Not for tonight, not like this." The word once sat in the air. Victor looked at the window again. Then he straightened his collar. He smoothed his shirt. He picked his jacket up from the counter stool where he draped it. He did all of this very deliberately, the way a man tries to own the final moment of a room he's being forced to leave. "We'll finish this conversation through proper channels," he said, to Emily, not to Jackson Ward, because he couldn't quite bring himself to address Jackson Ward anymore. Emily looked at him. Her hands had stopped shaking. She wasn't sure exactly when that had happened. "Get out of my diner," she said. 2 words, steady as stone. Victor Kane walked out. Dennis followed. The bell above the door rang twice. For a moment, nobody moved. Then old Pete Rafferty pushed his baseball cap back on his head and said quietly, "Well, I'll be damned." One of the truckers in the back booth let out a long, shaking breath. The other one started to laugh, not cruelly, not at anything in particular, just the laugh of someone releasing pressure that had been building for a while. Emily realized she was leaning against the counter. She didn't remember deciding to do that. She straightened up. She pressed her palms flat against the laminate. She breathed. Jackson Ward was watching her with something careful in his expression. "You okay?" he asked. She almost said yes, the automatic, trained, exhausted reflex of a woman who had been saying yes and fine, and I'm managing for 11 months straight. Instead, she said no. Her voice broke on it, just slightly. Jackson Ward nodded once, like that was the right answer. Like no was what honesty sounded like, and he respected it. Cole, he said without turning around. Yeah, Cole Maddox said from the doorway. Get her some coffee. Cole Maddox looked at Emily. Something passed across his face, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. He moved behind the counter with the ease of someone who's been in a lot of kitchens, found the coffee pot, and poured a mug. He set it in front of her. She looked at it. She looked at him. You came back, she said. Made a call, he said. One call, she said. One call, and 120 people showed up. He picked up his own coffee mug, the one he had left half full, and took a sip like none of this was particularly remarkable. People were available, he said. She laughed. She hadn't expected to. It came out small and ragged and slightly hysterical around the edges, and she pressed her hand over her mouth, and for a moment she thought she was going to cry. She breathed through it, steadied herself. Thank you, she said, to Cole, to Jackson, to the room to the window, to the 120 headlights still burning softly outside. Thank you. Jackson Ward reached into his jacket and produced a business card. He set it on the counter beside her coffee. Tomorrow morning, he said, you call that number. Woman named Rebecca Sloan. She's a lawyer, knows exactly the kind of arrangement you're dealing with. She'll tell you what you are actually looking at. Emily picked up the card. She looked at it. I can't afford. You can afford to make the call, Jackson Ward said. That's all you need to do tomorrow. He looked at her for a moment longer. His expression was not soft exactly. It was something more durable than soft. Something that had been tested and held. Nobody should have to write a note like that, he said quietly. Nobody should be in a position where that's all they've got left. Emily Carter stood in her dead father's diner at 12:09 in the morning, holding a lawyer's business card and a cup of coffee surrounded by the low rumble of engines that were already beginning one by one to quiet. She thought about Caleb, Spider-Man blanket, grandfather's ears. She thought about Gerald Carter painting that sign by hand. She thought about 12 minutes and 2 words in a stranger who'd walked out without a word and come back with everything. Outside, slowly the motorcycles were leaving. Not all at once, gradually, like a tide going out, the sound diminishing degree by degree until the highway outside was quiet again, and the only light was the neon glow of the diner sign reflected in the dark pavement. Cole Maddox finished his coffee. He set down the mug. He reached into his jacket for his wallet. Don't, Emily said. He looked at her. Please, she said. Don't pay tonight. Just don't. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he put his wallet away. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. He walked out. The bell rang once. Emily stood alone in Carter's diner in the quiet that came after a storm and looked up at the clock on the wall. Still 3 minutes slow. She thought, Dad, you would not believe this night. She thought, I need to call Linda and tell her I'm okay. She thought, tomorrow I call a lawyer named Rebecca Sloan. She set down her coffee. She squared her shoulders. She walked to the window and looked out at the empty highway, at the dark and the stars and the marsh straight road running through the Montana night like a sentence waiting to be finished. Behind her, the pie case hummed. The neon sign buzzed softly. Carter's diner breathed. And Emily Carter, single mother, waitress, daughter owner, a woman who had spent 11 months doing everything alone, stood in the middle of everything her father had built and understood for the first time what it felt like not to be. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay on Linda's couch. She hadn't wanted to wake Caleb, hadn't wanted to move him, so she just stayed and stared at the ceiling with the business card pressed between both palms, like something fragile that might disappear if she set it down. Rebecca Sloan. The name felt foreign. Lawyers felt foreign. The entire night felt foreign, like something that had happened to a character in a movie she'd watched once and half forgotten. But the card was real. The weight of it was real. And when Linda padded out of her bedroom at 6:15 in the morning and found Emily already sitting up, already dressed, already staring at the phone on the kitchen table, she didn't ask questions. She just put the coffee on. That was the thing about Linda Marsh. 23 years of friendship, and she knew exactly when to talk and exactly when to just make coffee. You going to call? Linda asked. At 8, Emily said, when offices open. You don't know that a lawyer's office opens at 8. Then I'll call at 8 and leave a message. Linda sat down across from her. She wrapped both hands around her own mug and looked at Emily the way she'd been looking at her for 11 months with a particular kind of worry that she was too kind to say out loud. Em, she said, What actually happened last night? Emily looked at her. She thought about how to explain it. She thought about Victor Kane's pressed shirt and his 12-minute deadline. She thought about 2 words on a receipt. She thought about 120 headlights blazing through the window like something out of a dream she hadn't known she was allowed to have. Something changed, Emily said. She called Rebecca Sloan at 8:03. Rebecca Sloan picked up on the second ring, which Emily had not expected, and said, "Emily Carter," before Emily had finished introducing herself, which Emily had expected even less. "Jackson called ahead," Rebecca said. Her voice was direct, not cold direct. The voice of a woman who had learned that efficiency was its own form of kindness. "I've been waiting for your call. Can you come in today? I have a lunch shift." "Before your lunch shift?" Emily paused. "You know about my lunch shift? I know you work doubles and you have a 6-year-old and you inherited a property with a debt attached to it that you did not create." A brief pause. "I know quite a bit, Ms. Carter. Jackson gave me the broad strokes. What I need from you is the paperwork. Everything you have, every document that came with that diner, and anything with Ryan Mercer's name on it." The name landed like a stone in still water. Ryan Mercer. She hadn't said his name out loud in months, had trained herself not to, had carefully constructed a life in which he existed only as a cautionary story she would someday tell Caleb when Caleb was old enough to understand what it meant when someone chose a bad bet over the people who loved them. "I'll bring everything," Emily said. She brought 3 grocery bags full of folders. Rebecca Sloan's office was on the 2nd floor of a building downtown that smelled like old wood and printer toner. Rebecca herself was somewhere in her late 40s, slim, dark-haired, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the particular energy of a person who operated at a slightly higher speed than everyone around her. She shook Emily's hand once hard and immediately started going through the bags. Emily sat across the desk and watched her read. The silence stretched. A minute, 3 minutes, 5. Then Rebecca said without looking up, page 18. "I know," Emily said. "The liability transfer clause." "Did you sign this?" Rebecca held up one of the documents, a thick stack paper-clipped, covered in small type. "No," Emily said. "I've never seen that document before in my life." Rebecca looked up. Her expression had shifted. The efficient calm was still there, but underneath it, something had sharpened, something alert. "Your signature is on page 22, she said. Emily felt the floor tilt. "That's not my signature," she said. "I know it's not your signature." Rebecca set the document down and took off her reading glasses and looked at Emily with something that was almost not quite excitement, the restrained excitement of a lawyer who has just found something she was looking for. "It doesn't match the signature on your driver's license, Bobby, in the intake form you filled out this morning. The loop on the Y is completely different. The C is wrong. Whoever signed this was working from memory or a photocopy. They were close, but not close enough." Emily stared at the document, at the signature that wore her name but wasn't hers. "Ryan," she said, "almost certainly, or someone Ryan paid." Rebecca leaned forward. "Ms. Carter, I need you to understand something. This is not just a problem for you. If this signature is forged, and I am highly confident it is, then what Meridian Capital has been doing to you isn't aggressive debt collection. It's fraud, potentially criminal fraud. And if they knew about the forgery, they had to have known," Emily said. Her voice was steady in a way that surprised her. The shock had passed so quickly it barely registered. Maybe because some part of her had always known, always suspected that the documents were wrong, that something in the paperwork was built on a foundation that wouldn't hold if you pressed it hard enough. "They're the ones who brought me the documents. They walked me through them. If the signature is forged and they used it anyway, then they're not a debt collection company," Rebecca said. "They're a predatory operation using fraudulent instruments to seize assets from people who can't afford to fight back." She paused. "This is not the first time I've seen this structure, Ms. Carter. I want you to know that. It is not the first time." The room was very quiet. "How many times?" Emily asked. Rebecca looked at her for a moment, measuring something. "Let me make some calls," she said, "and then I want to tell you a story." She made Emily wait in the outer office for 40 minutes. The receptionist, a young man named Theo, who clearly ran the place with quiet efficiency, brought her coffee in a granola bar that she ate without tasting. She sat and looked at her phone and thought about page 22, about a signature that wore her name, about a man she'd once loved who had apparently reached back across 4 years of silence to burn the last thing she had left. When Rebecca came back, she closed the door and sat on the edge of her desk rather than behind it. "Okay," she said. "I need you to brace yourself." Emily looked at her. "How bad?" "The debt attached to your diner," Rebecca said, "is one of at least 11. 11 properties, Miss Carter. 11 different people, widows, veterans, small business owners, all connected to Meridian Capital Solutions through the same structure. A primary borrower who either disappeared or became incapacitated. A liability transfer clause buried in documents most people never read. A forged signature or a coerced one that nobody ever had the resources to challenge." She paused. "The smallest amount they've extracted is $40,000. The largest," she stopped. "The largest is ongoing. A family in Idaho has been fighting them for 3 years." Emily said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "And nobody caught this. Nobody had the pieces in the same room at the same time." Rebecca held her gaze. "You might be the first person who's come in with enough documentation to connect the pattern. Your father kept everything, Ms. Carter. Every receipt, every filing, every original copy. Most of the other victims, their paperwork was incomplete or they'd already surrendered documents to Meridian as part of the proceedings." She paused. "Your father's habit of holding on to paper might be the thing that saves everything." Emily pressed her lips together hard, looked at the ceiling for a moment, breathed. Gerald Carter had kept everything. Tax filings from 1989, equipment warranties from 2003, delivery receipts from suppliers who'd been out of business for a decade. She had teased him about it, called it hoarding with a filing system. He had always said mildly that you never knew what you'd need. "What do I do?" she said. "You let me build a case," Rebecca said. "It will take time. It will not be easy or fast. Victor Kane has resources, and he will use them. When he finds out you've engaged a lawyer, and he will find out probably within 48 hours, he will accelerate whatever legal actions he has pending, and he will look for pressure points." She looked at Emily steadily. "He'll know that the diner is your income. He may try to interfere with that directly. He may try to contact your suppliers, your landlord for the commercial space, anyone connected to the business. He is going to try to make your life impossible." "My life is already impossible," Emily said. It came out flat, not self-pitying, just true. Rebecca almost smiled. "Good," she said. "Women who are already impossible to break are harder to run off." Emily drove back to the diner. She had 40 minutes before her lunch shift. She used them to call Linda, update her on enough that Linda would stop worrying and start worrying in a more informed way, and then sat in the parking lot and did something she hadn't done in a long time. She talked to her father, not out loud, just in the way you carry someone. After they're gone, the conversation that runs underneath everything, the one you have in the space between thinking and speaking. "I found it, Dad," she thought. "Page 18, page 22, the loop on the why. You kept everything. You kept all of it. I've got a lawyer now, and I don't know what I've got. Something I didn't have 2 days ago." She wiped her face, went inside, put on the apron. She had tables to run. Victor Kane did not come back the next day, or the day after. The absence was in its way louder than his presence had been. Emily could feel it, the shape of something building pressure, accumulating somewhere out of sight the way weather builds before a storm you can't see yet. On the third day, her produce supplier called. His name was Tom Briggs, and he'd been delivering to Carter's Diner for 16 years, since before Emily even worked there. "Emily," he said, and his voice had the particular quality of a man who has been told something uncomfortable and is trying to figure out how to pass it on. "I got a call this morning." Her grip on the phone tightened. "From who?" "Man who didn't give a name. Said there were some regulatory questions about your business license. Said it might not be in my interest to maintain supply contracts with businesses under investigation." A pause. "I'm not going to stop delivering, Em. I want you to know that right away. I thought you should know someone made the call." "Tom," she said carefully. "Thank you. Please document it. Date, time, everything you can remember." She called Rebecca before she'd even hung up with Tom. Rebecca said, "Already? 3 days." "He's scared." Rebecca's voice was brisk even. "Scared men move fast. He's going to try to cut your legs out from under you before we get traction. Supplier's business contacts, he'll work the perimeter. Has he done anything direct yet? No. He will. When he does, call me immediately. Do not respond to him directly. Do not respond to any documents from Meridian. Do not sign anything. And do not let him engage you in conversation without a witness. Emily thought of 12 minutes, of soft, certain cold. Rebecca, she said, what if he escalates beyond business pressure? A brief pause. You mean physical? I mean, I'm a woman alone in a diner at midnight, 3 nights a week. Another pause. This one different. Heavier. Call Cole Maddox, Rebecca said. Emily stopped. You know Cole? I know Jackson Ward. Jackson knows Cole. Cole is the reason you called me. A beat. The people who sent you to me, Ms. Carter, they are not done. They're watching. Call Cole and tell him what Tom told you today. She didn't call Cole. Not that day. She was too proud for it, or too stubborn, or if she was being honest with herself. The honest way she tried to be honest about hard things, too afraid of what it meant to need people on a regular basis instead of just in moments of crisis. Needing someone once felt like necessity. Needing someone twice started to feel like dependency, and she had built her whole identity around not being dependent. She lasted 4 more days. Then the brick came through the window. It was a Tuesday, 10:20 p.m. She was cashing out the register, the diner empty. Old Pete Rafferty gone home an hour ago, the parking lot dark. There was no note on the brick. There didn't need to be. The message was the brick itself. She stood in the middle of broken glass and looked at it, a plain construction brick sitting in the middle of the diner floor, and she felt something she hadn't felt in the diner since the night of the 12-minute deadline. Not just fear. Something older and more fundamental. The feeling of being hunted, of being pursued into a small space by something patient and certain. She picked up her phone. She called Cole Maddox. He answered on the second ring. Yeah, he said. Someone threw a brick through my window, she said. Her voice was almost completely steady. She was proud of that, and also aware that being proud of her steadiness while standing in broken glass was somewhat beside the point. A pause. 3 seconds, maybe 4. You hurt? He said. No. Anybody else there? No, I'm alone. Okay, he said. Don't touch the brick. Call the sheriff. I know Hargrove hasn't been useful, but you need this on record. Then turn on every light in the place. The window is open now. It's 40 degrees. I know, he said. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 14. He came through the front door, stepping carefully around the glass, and looked at the brick, and then at Emily with an expression that she was beginning to understand was his version of fury, very quiet, very still, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Did Hargrove come? He asked. He's on his way. He sounded different on the phone, more serious. Good. Cole crouched down and looked at the brick without touching it. Emily, I need you to hear me on something. She looked at him. This isn't going to get easier before it gets harder. You understand that Kane is not going to walk away quietly. He's got too much to lose now, which means he's got nothing left to moderate him. He looked up at her. His eyes were direct, not unkind direct, the way Rebecca Sloan was direct, the efficient kindness of people who had learned that false comfort cost more than it was worth. What happened the other night, the guys showing up, walking him out, that bought you time and it rattled him. But rattled men do things like this. He gestured at the brick. And then they do worse things. Emily sat down on a counter stool. She felt the weight of the past 11 months in her spine, in her knees, in the backs of her eyes. I don't know how to keep doing this, she said, quietly, not a complaint, just a fact. You don't have to do it alone, Cole said. You keep saying things like that, she said. Everyone keeps saying things like that. But at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, it's still just me and a brick on the floor. Cole was quiet for a moment. It's not just you, he said. I know it doesn't feel like that yet. I know you haven't had reason to believe it. But it's not just you, Emily. He stood up. Let Hargrove take the report. I'm going to make a call, and tomorrow morning, there are going to be some people here helping board this window and doing some other things. You don't need to ask me to do it. You don't need to thank me for it. You just need to let it happen. Deputy Hargrove arrived 12 minutes later with a notepad and a different look on his face than he'd had at their last conversation. Someone had spoken to him, she didn't know who, but someone had, because the man who came through the door was paying attention in a way that he hadn't been before. He took photographs. He bagged the brick. He took Emily's statement with the care of a man who understood that what he wrote down mattered. Before he left, he looked at Cole Maddox and said something quiet that Emily didn't catch. Cole nodded once. After Hargrove left, Emily stood in the cold air coming through the broken window and looked at Cole and said, "What did he say?" Cole was quiet for a beat. Then, "He said he's been getting some calls from other businesses, other people who've had visits from Meridian Capital." He paused. "You're not the only one in this county, Emily." The realization moved through her slow and then all at once the way cold moves through a room when a window breaks. Victor Kane hadn't come to Montana for just her diner. He'd come for all of it. A territory, a systematic operation that had been running longer than she knew, touching more lives than she'd imagined, and hiding in the gap between what was legal and what was right. She thought about Rebecca Sloan, 11 properties. And suddenly the brick on the floor felt different. Not just an act of intimidation, an act of desperation. The move of a man who had seen the first crack appear in something he had spent years building in the dark and was now trying by whatever means necessary to stop the light from getting in. "He knows," Emily said slowly. "He knows I went to a lawyer. He knows something shifted." Cole looked at her. "Yeah." "He's scared." "Yeah," Cole said again. Emily Carter stood in her father's diner at 11:09 on a Tuesday night in cold air and broken glass and felt something she had not felt in 11 months. Not safety, not peace, not even hope exactly. Something harder than hope. Something that doesn't ask permission and doesn't require reassurance and doesn't need the outcome to be certain before it decides to stand its ground. She looked at Cole Maddox and said, "Tell me what comes next." Cole told her what came next over 2 cups of bad coffee at 2 in the morning, sitting across from each other at the counter while the cold air pushed through the boarded window like it was testing the repair job. What came next was not dramatic. That was the part nobody ever told you about. Fighting back. The actual texture of it was exhausting and slow and full of paperwork and phone calls and waiting. Cole said this plainly, the way he said most things without cushioning it. "Rebecca is going to need time," he said. "Weeks, maybe more. Building a case like this isn't a single punch. It's 100 small things that add up to something the court can't ignore. And while she's doing that, Kane is going to keep applying pressure because pressure is the only tool he has left." "So I just survive in the meantime," Emily said. "You keep the diner open," Cole said. "You keep showing up. Every day you're still standing is a day his strategy isn't working." She looked at her coffee. "That's a very quiet way to fight a war." "Most real fights are quiet," he said. "The loud ones are just the parts people see." He left at 2:40. Emily locked up and drove to Linda's to sleep for 4 hours before the breakfast shift. She lay on the couch with her eyes open and thought about 11 properties. 11 families who had been run through the same machine, who had signed documents they didn't understand, who had believed in the law the way you believe in something until the moment it fails you. She thought about the forged signature on page 22, the loop on the Y. Someone sitting somewhere Ryan, or a man Ryan had hired, or a man that man had hired, carefully copying her name onto a document that would be used years later to take the only thing her father left behind. She thought about how much calculation was involved in that, how many steps of planning, how many people had to look the other way. She slept for 3 hours and 12 minutes. She knew this because she counted. The next morning, 2 men from the Hells Angels chapter, she would learn their names, were Dix and Paulie. Both of whom turned out to work construction and civilian life, showed up at 7 a.m. with lumberglass tools and no particular interest in being thanked. They replaced the window in under 2 hours with a professionalism that suggested they had fixed far more complicated things than glass. Dix, who was the quieter of the two, patched the frame so cleanly that it looked better than the original. Emily brought them coffee and eggs, and they ate at the counter without ceremony. "You don't have to do this," she said. It was the reflex. She couldn't help it. Dix looked at her over his coffee mug. "Cole asked us to," he said. "I know, but that's enough," he said. Not rudely, just enough, like the sentence was complete and didn't need more words. She stopped arguing. That was the day she started learning to let people help her. Not easily, not without the stubborn resistance of a woman who had spent years treating self-sufficiency as a personal virtue and need as a personal failure. But the lesson was beginning one small surrender at a time, and it would cost her less than she expected. 3 days later, Victor Kane filed a motion to accelerate the debt resolution proceedings. Rebecca called Emily the moment it hit her desk. "He's pushing the timeline," Rebecca said. "He wants a court date within 60 days. Can he do that?" "He can request it. Whether the court grants it depends on the judge and how the docket looks." A pause. "Emily, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm." "That sentence never precedes good news," Emily said. "No," Rebecca agreed. "It doesn't. I've been in contact with an attorney in Boise, a woman named Carol Hendricks, who represents one of the other Meridian victims, a veteran named David Park. He's been fighting them for 18 months. His case is further along than yours, and it has some overlapping documentation." Another pause. "Emily, Ryan Mercer's name is in David Park's paperwork." The diner seemed to contract slightly around her. "Ryan," she said. "It appears Ryan Mercer was not just a borrower," Rebecca said carefully. "There are transaction records suggesting he may have been involved in the early structure of the arrangement. Not a victim, a participant." Emily sat down on the nearest stool. She put her hand flat on the counter. "He set it up," she said. "We don't know the full extent." "He set it up," she said again. Not a question, not disbelief. Just the sound of a thing clicking into place that she had always half known was there. Ryan Mercer, who had a gift for finding the angle in every situation. Ryan Mercer, who had borrowed money from people she'd never met and disappeared before the bills came due. Ryan Mercer, who had signed her name on page 22. He was part of it. He helped them build the structure, and then he used my father's diner as collateral, and then he left. "Emily." "He knew my father had cancer," Emily said. Her voice dropped very low. "He knew because I told him. We were separated, but I still called him when Dad was diagnosed. I thought he should know. I thought—" She stopped, breathed. "He knew my father was going to die. He knew I would inherit. He set the whole thing up knowing that I would be the one left holding it." The silence on the phone was the particular silence of someone who has no words adequate to the moment and is honest enough not to pretend otherwise. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, and meant it. "Find him," Emily said. Her voice had gone completely flat, stripped of everything except intention. "Whatever you need to do, whatever it takes, find Ryan Mercer and find out exactly how deep in this he was." "Already working on it," Rebecca said quietly. Emily hung up. She looked at the window Dix and Polly had fixed, looked at it for a long time. Then she put her apron back on and went out to refill coffee because there were people in the diner who needed coffee, and the diner needed to stay open, and she had decided to keep standing, so she was going to stand. It was the hardest 30 minutes of waiting tables she had ever done. That Thursday, Cole came in at his usual time. Black coffee, apple pie, the same stool at the end of the counter. She waited until the diner was mostly empty before she said, "I need to tell you something." He looked up. She told him about Ryan, about page 22, about David Park in Boise, about the phone call from Rebecca and the word participant and the realization that had settled over her like something cold and permanent. Cole listened without interrupting. This was something she'd noticed about him. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush to fill silences, didn't offer opinions before they were ready. He just listened fully the way very few people actually listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How are you?" he said. Not "what are you going to do?" or "that's terrible," or any of the responses that would have required her to perform something. Just the direct question, the real one. "I'm angry," she said. "I've been afraid for 11 months, and now I'm angry. At Ryan, at Meridian, at the whole system. Whatever you want to call it. The whole machine that makes it so easy for people like Kane to do what they do because the people they target are too exhausted and too broke and too scared to fight back." She paused. "And I'm angry at myself for trusting Ryan in the first place, for calling him when my dad got sick." "That's not something to be angry at yourself for," Cole said. "I know," she said. "I'm angry at myself anyway." He nodded. He didn't try to argue her out of it. He just nodded like that made sense because it did. "Cole," she said, "can I ask you something personal?" He tilted his head slightly. Not a no. "Jackson said you were a Marine," she said, "and you come here every Thursday. Same thing every time. And you seem like someone who's carrying something. I don't mean that badly. She stopped trying to find the honest version of what she wanted to say. I'm trying to understand why you answered that note, why you made that call. You didn't know me. He looked at his coffee for a moment. I knew enough, he said. What's enough? He was quiet for a beat. Then, I watched a woman run herself into the ground for 3 months before she asked for help, shaking hands every Thursday, eyes that looked like someone who stopped sleeping right, smile that came a half second too slow. He paused. I've seen that before. On people who were in situations that were going to end badly if something didn't change. Another pause. I was in a situation once, long time ago, different kind, and nobody made the call for me. The weight of that settled between them without ceremony. I'm sorry, Emily said. Don't be sorry, he said. Just when you saw me read the note and walk out. You thought I left. Yes. I need you to know that I was never leaving, he said. I walked out to make the call where Kane couldn't hear it. That's all. I was never leaving. She looked at him. Something in her chest shifted, not dramatically, not the way things shifted in movies, but the small and permanent way that real things change when you finally understand something true. Thank you, she said. Stop thanking me, he said. But the corner of his mouth moved just slightly. She almost smiled back. Almost. Then her phone rang. It was Rebecca. She picked up. Are you sitting down? Rebecca said. Tell me. David Park's attorney just sent me a file. Ryan Mercer, they found him. He's been living under a different name in Nevada for the past 3 years. And Emily, Rebecca's voice, normally so controlled, had a particular tension in it. He's been doing it again. Different state, different LLC, same structure. He's actively working with another arm of Meridian's operation. He is not a peripheral figure. He is a central one. Emily gripped the phone. He's still running it, she said. Yes. From Nevada. Yes. Across the counter, Cole watched her face and said nothing. Rebecca, Emily said, what do we do with this? Carol Hendricks in Boise has already been on the phone with a federal contact. What we have is Emily, what we have. If we can get the remaining documentation aligned, it is potentially a RICO case. Racketeering. This is no longer a civil debt dispute. This is a criminal enterprise that has been operating across state lines for years. She paused, and in the pause, Emily could hear her choosing words carefully. Your diner was not just a target. Your diner may be the key. Your father's paperwork, the forged signature, the direct connection to Ryan Mercer, who connects to the federal layer, it's a chain, a complete chain. Emily was standing very still. She thought about Gerald Carter, about 19 boxes of folders, about warranties from 2003 and delivery receipts from suppliers who'd been gone for a decade. About a man who said you never know what you'll need and meant it with his whole heart. My father saved every piece of paper, she said softly. I know, Rebecca said. I know he did. Emily lowered the phone for a second, pressed it against her sternum, breathed once hard, then raised it back. Tell me what you need from me, she said. Everything you haven't already given me, Rebecca said. And I mean everything. I'm coming to the diner tomorrow with a paralegal and we're going through every box. I'll have coffee ready, Emily said. She hung up. She looked at Cole. He was watching her with that particular still attention. Ryan's in Nevada, she said. He's still running the same operation. Federal level now, Rebecca thinks RICO. Cole set down his coffee mug. He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Okay, he said, okay. She almost laughed. That's all you've got? Okay. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something bigger than okay. This is huge. This is a federal case, Cole. My father's diner is evidence in a federal case. Cole looked at her steadily. Emily, he said, that man used you, used your grief, your father's death, your signature to build something ugly. And now the whole thing is coming apart because your father couldn't bring himself to throw away a receipt. He paused. Yeah, okay, it's more than okay. But this isn't over yet. And you know that. She did know that. The word RICO sounded enormous, and it was, but enormous. Didn't mean fast, and it didn't mean easy. And Victor Kane was still out there, still filing motions, still making calls to suppliers, still looking for pressure points. The federal interest changed the shape of the war. It did not end it. 3 days after Rebecca's call, Emily got a visitor she had not expected. A woman, mid-50s, work-worn hands, eyes that carried the specific exhaustion Emily recognized because she saw it in the mirror, the exhaustion of someone who has been afraid for a long time and kept going anyway. She came in during the lunch rush, sat at the counter, ordered coffee, and waited until Emily had a moment. "My name is Sandra Park," she said. "David Park is my son." Emily sat down across from her. Sandra Park had driven 6 hours from Boise. She had found out about Emily through Rebecca and Carol Hendricks, and she had driven 6 hours because she needed to look at the person who might be the thing that finally broke Meridian Capital open. "David almost lost everything," Sandra said. Her hands were wrapped around the coffee mug. 18 months. He's a veteran, served 2 tours, came home and built a landscaping business from nothing, just like your father built this. And they came for it the same way they came for this. She looked around the diner once, looked back at Emily. "How old is your boy?" "6, Emily said. "6." Sandra nodded slowly. "David has 2 daughters, 4 and 7. When this started, he stopped sleeping. I mean, completely. I would come over and find him at his kitchen table at 4 in the morning just sitting, because he was terrified that when his girls woke up, the thing he'd built for them would be gone." Emily said nothing. She didn't need to. "I drove here because I needed you to know that," Sandra said. "Not to put pressure on you, but because the people doing this, they count on you not knowing it about the others. They count on everyone feeling like they're the only one, like they must have done something to deserve it." Her jaw tightened. "You didn't deserve this. David didn't deserve this. And when this goes federal, and it will go federal, I want you to be ready for what that looks like. Because they will come at you harder. They will find out what matters to you, and they will push on it." Emily thought about Caleb, Spider-Man blanket, grandfather's ears. "What matters to me," Emily said, "is that 6-year-old boy in this diner, and I'm not giving either of them up." Sandra Park looked at her for a long moment. Then she reached across the counter and covered Emily's hand with both of hers. "Good," she said. "Neither is my son." She left 2 hours later with a full meal on the house and a box of the apple pie that Gerald Carter's recipe had made legendary in 3 counties. Emily watched her drive away and felt a particular solidarity of shared battle, not comfortable, not reassuring but real, in a way that comfort rarely was. She was still standing at the window when her phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Short, 3 words. "They found Ryan." And then a second text arriving 6 seconds later that changed everything Emily thought she understood about the shape of what she was in. "He's been talking to the FBI for 2 months. Emily stared at the screen. Read it again. Read it a third time. Ryan Mercer, the man who had forged her name, who had used her father's dying body as a financial instrument, who had built a machine that had run over 11 families, had been cooperating with federal investigators for 2 months, which meant that the federal case Rebecca had mentioned was not beginning. It was already in progress. It had been in progress while Victor Kane was filing motions and throwing bricks through windows and calling produce suppliers believing he was still in control. The man she had been afraid of for 11 months had been standing in a burning building for 2 of them without knowing it. Emily set the phone down on the counter. She pressed both palms flat against the surface. She breathed. Old Pete Rafferty, who had settled into his usual corner booth and appeared to be doing his daily crossword, said, without looking up, "You okay over there, Emily?" She almost said fine. She almost said yes. "Yeah, Pete," she said instead. "Yeah, I think I actually am." She picked up the coffee pot, went around the counter, refilled Pete's cup without being asked the way her father had always done it, the way Carter's Diner had always worked small gestures, repeated faithfully, day after day, holding the whole thing together by the sheer force of showing up. The clock above the pie case read 7 minutes slow now. She had been meaning to fix it for weeks. She kept forgetting. Tonight, she told herself. Tonight she would fix the clock. Her father had never gotten around to it. She would. It was the smallest possible thing. It was also in a way she couldn't entirely explain the most important decision she had made in months. She fixed the clock that night. It took her 4 minutes and a stepladder and a flathead screwdriver she found in the drawer. Her father had always called the everything drawer, the one full of batteries and rubber bands and old keychains and the particular accumulated debris of a life lived in one place for a long time. She set it 7 minutes forward. She stepped down. She looked at it, 11:47, the real time. For the first time in 6 years, the clock above the pie case said what it meant. She stood there longer than she needed to. Then she turned off the lights and went home. She did not tell Cole about Ryan's cooperation with the FBI. Not yet. Not because she didn't trust him. She had moved well past that, quietly without ceremony, the way trust builds between people who go through hard things together. She didn't tell him because she needed one night to sit with the information herself, to turn it over, to understand what it actually meant. What it meant was this: the federal investigators already had Ryan. They had his testimony, his records, his cooperation, which meant they had documentation of Meridian's operation from the inside. What Emily's case gave them was the outside, the documented victim, the forged signature, the complete paper trail that Gerald Carter had preserved in 19 boxes because he could not bring himself to throw anything away. Ryan Mercer had handed them the engine. Emily Carter had the blueprint. Together, they had everything. She understood this with the clarity that came sometimes at 2 a.m. when exhaustion stripped away everything except the essential. She sat at Linda's kitchen table. She had started thinking of it as her second kitchen table, which said something about the year she'd had, and wrote it out longhand on a legal pad. Not for anyone else, just for herself, just to see it in her own handwriting, real and solid on paper. Ryan's testimony, internal operations, transaction records, co-conspirators. My case, forged documentation, direct victim account, property records. Rebecca's work, cross-state pattern, 11 properties, Carol Hendricks. Sandra Park and David, 18 months of fighting, corroborating pattern. She looked at the list. Then she wrote one more line at the bottom. Dad's filing cabinet, the thing that started all of it. She folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket. She kept it there for the rest of the week like a talisman. Rebecca called at 7:15 the next morning before Emily had finished her first cup of coffee. I need you to come in today, Rebecca said. Her voice had the controlled tension of someone holding something large and important steady with both hands. What happened? Victor Kane filed an emergency motion this morning. He's claiming that your engagement of legal counsel constitutes interference with an existing financial resolution process. He wants the court to place an injunction on the diner's operating accounts while proceedings are active. Emily set down her coffee. He wants to freeze my accounts, she said. He wants to make it impossible for you to keep the diner open while the case moves forward, Rebecca said flatly. Cut off your cash flow, force you to default on your operating costs, and then claim the property under financial distress. It's an escalation, a significant one. Can he do it? He can try. The motion is in front of Judge Patricia Morrow, who I happen to know has seen this specific maneuver before and does not think particularly highly of it. But I need you here to sign a counter affidavit, and I need it today because the hearing on the motion is tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, Emily repeated. Victor Kane is not a patient man anymore, Rebecca said. He knows something shifted. He may not know what exactly he may not know about Ryan. He certainly doesn't know the federal dimension yet, but he can feel the ground moving, and he is throwing everything he has at keeping you from getting traction. Emily was already reaching for her jacket. I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said. She called Cole from the car. 3 rings. Kane filed an emergency motion, she said the moment he picked up. Trying to freeze the diner's accounts. Hearings tomorrow. A beat of silence. Rebecca's on it, he said. I'm on my way to her office now. Okay, another pause. Emily, after you're done there, don't go back to the diner alone tonight. Cole, I'm not saying it to manage you. I'm saying it because a man who files emergency motions at 7 in the morning is a man who did something else the night before that he thinks is going to matter. Be careful today. She drove the rest of the way to Rebecca's office with that sentence sitting in her chest like a stone. The counter affidavit took 2 hours. Rebecca walked her through every line with the precision of someone who understood that the words on this particular document would be read by a federal judge at some point and needed to hold up under scrutiny. Emily signed her name 11 times. Each time she thought about page 22, about the forged loop on the Y. She made sure her signature was exactly, completely, unmistakably hers. Theo, the receptionist, brought lunch at noon. They ate at Rebecca's desk without stopping work. At 1:30, Rebecca's phone rang. She picked it up, listened for approximately 45 seconds, and her expression shifted in a way that Emily had never seen before. Not alarm exactly, but a sudden acute attention like an antenna swinging toward a signal. When, Rebecca said, a pause. How many? Another pause. Don't move anything. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. She hung up. She looked at Emily. That was Carol Hendricks, she said. Emily straightened. Someone approached David Park last night, Rebecca said. Man came to his business. Didn't identify himself. Told David that if he withdrew his lawsuit and stopped cooperating with attorneys, his daughter's school situation would be, and I'm quoting, significantly more complicated. The room went very quiet. Emily heard the sentence, processed it, let it move through her. He threatened his children, she said. He implied a threat but adjacent to his children, which is legally distinct but morally identical. Rebecca's voice was completely controlled. Too controlled. The control of someone who was very angry and had chosen to be precise about it rather than loud. Carol has already been on the phone with her federal contact. This changes the classification of what Meridian's people are doing. This is no longer aggressive civil litigation. This is witness intimidation in an active federal investigation. Emily's mind went immediately instinctively to Caleb. 6 years old, Spider-Man blanket, Linda's house across town. Rebecca, she said. I know, Rebecca said. Caleb. I know, I'm already thinking about it. Rebecca picked up her phone again. I need to make 2 calls. Stay here. She stepped out. Emily sat in the chair across from the empty desk and stared at the wall and thought about what kind of man threatens a 6-year-old's school situation. What kind of operation generates that kind of man? What kind of machinery requires at its outermost edge the intimidation of children to keep running? She called Linda. Hey, she stopped, started again. Can you keep Caleb home tomorrow? Just tomorrow. I'll explain later, but I just need him home. Linda, who had known Emily for 23 years and had learned exactly when not to ask questions, said, Already done. We'll make pancakes. Thank you, Emily said. Emily, Linda's voice dropped. Are you okay? I'm going to be, Emily said. That's the best I've got right now. Rebecca came back in 7 minutes. She sat down. She looked at Emily directly. Here is what is happening, she said. My federal contact through Carol's contact is moving to formalize the investigation of Meridian Capital Solutions under a racketeering framework. Ryan Mercer's cooperation is being formally incorporated. The intimidation of David Park last night accelerated the timeline significantly. She paused. Emily, within the next 72 hours, there will be federal action against Meridian. I cannot tell you exactly what form it takes because I genuinely don't know. What I can tell you is that Victor Kane's emergency motion tomorrow morning is going to land in a courtroom that is operating in a very different context than he thinks it is. Emily absorbed this. He's going to walk into that courtroom thinking he's still in control, she said slowly. Yes. And he's not. No, he is not. Rebecca folded her hands on the desk. But Emily, until that action happens, the next 72 hours are dangerous. A man who is about to be caught does one of 2 things: he stops or he accelerates. Victor Kane does not stop. That night, Emily did not go to the diner alone. She didn't even have to ask. Cole was in the parking lot when she arrived at 5 for the dinner shift, leaning against his bike, drinking gas station coffee with the easy patience of a man who had learned to wait without consuming himself. He didn't say anything about being there. She didn't say anything about being glad. They went inside together. She ran the dinner shift. He sat at the counter. At 7 p.m., Jackson Ward came in. He sat beside Cole, ordered coffee, looked at Emily with the calm, measuring attention she had come to associate with him, the look of a man taking a situation's temperature. Rebecca talked to him, he said. I figured, Emily said. 72 hours is a long time, he said. I know. We're going to have some people nearby, he said. Not asking, not offering, stating the way he stated things, not making a scene, just nearby. Emily thought about the window Dix and Polly had fixed, about Tom Briggs documenting the phone call, about Sandra Park driving 6 hours from Boise, about David Park sitting at his kitchen table at 4 a.m. because he was afraid for his daughters. Okay, she said, and this time she said it without resistance, without the reflex apology, without the trained instinct to minimize what she needed. Just okay. Clean and whole. Jackson Ward nodded. He drank his coffee. At 9 p.m., Emily's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. You should have taken the deal when you had the chance. Last warning. She showed it to Cole without speaking. He looked at it. His jaw tightened, the small, almost invisible tightening That was his version of a reaction. Screenshot it, he said. Send it to Rebecca right now. She did. Rebecca's response came back in under 4 minutes. Perfect, exactly what we needed. Do not respond. Emily set the phone face down on the counter. She breathed. Old Pete Rafferty in his corner booth said, Emily, the coffee's gone cold again. She picked up the pot, went around, refilled it. She stood beside Pete's table for a moment after and looked out the window at the dark parking lot at the shapes of motorcycles she could just barely see at the edges of the light. You've got people out there, Pete said. He wasn't looking at the window. He didn't need to. Yeah, she said. Good, he said. He turned a page of his crossword. Your daddy would have liked that. She didn't say anything. She went back behind the counter. At 10:40, 20 minutes before closing, Victor Kane walked through the door. Not Dennis, not a lawyer, not a process server with documents. Victor Kane himself. He looked different. The pressed shirt was the same. The silver temples were the same. But something in his face had shifted since the last time she'd seen him, the night of the 120 motorcycles, the night he'd walked out into the dark, with his collar straightened and his dignity assembled. The controlled composure was still there technically, but it was assembled now rather than natural, held together with the visible effort of a man who had been sleeping badly. Cole turned on his stool and looked at him. Said nothing. Jackson Ward turned and looked at him, said nothing. Victor Kane looked at both of them, then at Emily and walked to the counter. I'd like to speak with you, he said. To Emily. Careful, measured. Then speak, she said. She didn't move away from the register, didn't offer him a seat. This has gone in a direction that isn't productive for anyone, he said. I'm prepared to offer a resolution. The debt reclassified and significantly reduced. A reasonable payment structure. No further legal action. He paused. A clean closed Ms. Carter. For everyone. The diner was silent. Emily looked at him. She looked at the man who had given her 12 minutes on the worst night of her life. The man who had called Tom Briggs. The man whose associate had stood in front of a 6-year-old's father and said your daughter's school situation will be significantly more complicated. She looked at him and she felt something she had not expected to feel clarity. The absolute, total lightning clarity of a person who knows exactly where they stand. No, she said. He blinked, almost imperceptibly. Ms. Carter, I'd encourage you to think carefully. I said no, she said. We're done talking. You need to leave. Emily, his voice dropped. The warmth drained out of it completely. The real voice. You do not understand what you are walking away from. Cole Maddox stood up from his stool. He didn't move toward Victor. He just stood. All 6 feet and 210 pounds of him still and quiet and absolutely certain. Jackson Ward remained seated but turned his body slightly in a way that was not a threat and was entirely a threat. Victor Kane looked at Cole, looked at Jackson, looked around the diner at old Pete Rafferty, who had set down his crossword and was watching with his full attention, at the shapes outside in the parking lot, at the small, utterly ordinary diner that had somehow become the place where his entire operation started to come apart. He straightened his collar. He walked out. The bell above the door rang once. Emily let out a breath she had been holding for an uncertain amount of time. She pressed her hands flat on the counter, counted to 5. He's scared, Cole said. I know, she said. He came here himself, Cole said. Didn't send a lawyer and didn't send a letter. He came himself and offered to reduce the debt. He looked at her. Men like that don't negotiate unless the wall is already coming down. Rebecca said 72 hours, Emily said. Yeah. She looked at the clock above the pie case, the one she had fixed 4 nights ago. It read 10:48, exactly correctly 10:48. Cole, she said, what happens after the case, after the federal action, after it's over, after Victor Kane is gone, and Ryan is dealt with, and the diner is clear? She looked at him. What does that actually look like? I don't know how to picture it. I've been surviving so long, I don't know how to picture anything else. He was quiet for a moment, thinking genuinely, thinking not performing consideration. Same as this, he said. Coffee, pie, people come in and eat and go home. You run your father's diner. Caleb grows up knowing his grandfather built something worth keeping. He paused, just without the rest of it. She looked at him. That sounds, she stopped. Exactly right, she said softly. The next morning, Rebecca called at 6:02 a.m. Emily was already awake. She had not slept more than 2 consecutive hours. Are you watching the news? Rebecca said. No. Turn it on. She turned it on. Federal agents had executed search warrants at 6 Meridian Capital Solutions offices across 4 states simultaneously beginning at 5:30 a.m. Victor Kane had been taken in for questioning at his hotel. He had been staying in Billings 20 miles from Carter's diner, which meant he had never actually left. 3 associates, including Dennis, had been detained. Ryan Mercer, identified in federal filings as a cooperating witness, had provided the documentation that enabled the warrants. The news anchor said the phrase predatory lending operation targeting vulnerable Americans, and then said 11 known victims across 6 states, and then said the investigation is ongoing. Emily sat on Linda's couch with her phone in her lap and watched the television and listened to the words she had spent 11 months trying to make someone hear spoken plainly on a Tuesday morning news broadcast in the living room of her best friend's house. Linda came out of the bedroom, looked at the television, looked at Emily. Oh my God, Linda said. Yeah, Emily said. It's over. Emily thought about that. Thought about what Rebecca had said about 72 hours and what Cole had said about walls coming down and what Sandra Park had said about driving 6 hours because she needed to look at the person who might break it open. The worst part is over, she said. The rest is going to take time. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca. I'm watching, Emily said instead of hello. Good, Rebecca said. The court this morning, Victor's emergency motion, it's been stayed pending the federal investigation. Judge Morrow issued the stay 11 minutes ago. A pause, and in the pause, Emily heard something she had not heard before in Rebecca Sloane's measured, efficient voice relief. Real human bone-deep relief. Emily, the diner is safe for today, and tomorrow we start building the case that makes it safe permanently. Emily closed her eyes. In the kitchen, she could hear Caleb waking up, his voice still soft with sleep, asking Linda if it was a pancake morning. Linda said yes. Caleb said yes the way only a 6-year-old can say yes fully, completely, with his entire body, like the word pancake contained everything worth celebrating in the world. Emily listened to her son's voice and felt the first real, true, full breath she had taken in 11 months move through her from the bottom up. She opened her eyes. She looked at the clock on Linda's wall. She looked at her phone. She looked at the television where a reporter was standing outside a glass-fronted office building with a chyron running underneath that said, Federal Probe into Multi-State Financial Fraud Operation. She thought, Dad, they heard us. They finally heard us. She stood up. She put on her jacket. She picked up her keys. Where are you going? Linda called from the kitchen. To open the diner, Emily said. Emily, it's 6 in the morning. I know, she said. I want to be there when the regulars come in. I want to be the one who opens the door. She drove through the early Montana morning with the radio off and the window cracked and the cold air coming in clean and sharp the way it does before the sun fully clears the ridge. She pulled into the parking lot of Carter's Diner. She sat for a moment, then she got out, walked to the front door, put her key in the lock. The door swung open. The pie case hummed. The neon sign buzzed on. The smell of the place, coffee and grease and something older. Something built into the walls over 37 years of Gerald Carter, showing up every single morning. It came at her all at once. She stood in the doorway of her father's diner and let it. Then she stepped inside, turned on every light, and started the coffee. The first customer through the door that morning was Tom Briggs. He came in at 6:47, same as he had for 16 years, carrying the particular smell of cold air and diesel that Emily had associated with Tuesday mornings since she was a teenager, helping her father with the breakfast prep. He set his keys on the counter. He sat on the second stool from the left. He looked at Emily behind the register and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, Saw the news this morning. Yeah, Emily said. She poured his coffee without being asked. You doing okay? She set the mug in front of him. She thought about the honest answer the way she'd been trying to think about honest answers since the night she'd said no instead of fine to Jackson Ward in the middle of broken glass and headlights. I'm doing better than okay, she said. I'm doing real. Tom Briggs looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, the nod of a man who understood what that meant without needing it explained. He wrapped his hands around his mug. He looked out the window at the morning. Your dad would have been furious, he said. I know. And then proud, he said. In that order. You know how he was. Emily laughed. It came out clean and whole, nothing ragged at the edges. Yeah, she said. I know exactly how he was. The breakfast rush came in waves the way it always did, and Emily moved through it the way she always did. Coffee orders, plates, refills, the familiar choreography of a diner morning that she had performed 10,000 times. And that felt this particular morning like something sacred. Not because anything about it was different, because everything about it was the same, and the same was what she had been fighting for, and the same was still here. Old Pete Rafferty came in at 7:30. He sat in his booth. He ordered as usual. He unfolded his crossword. At 8:15, he called across the diner, Emily, 6 letters. Stubborn persistence in the face of difficulty. She didn't even have to think about it. Tenacity, she said. Pete counted the letters on his fingers, nodded, wrote it in. At 9 a.m., Rebecca Sloan called. Emily stepped into the back office, her father's office still smelling faintly of him, of the particular combination of coffee and paperwork and Old Spice that she had stopped noticing for years and now noticed every single time and answered. Court confirmed the stay is holding, Rebecca said. Kane's legal team filed a challenge at 8 a.m. and it was denied by 8:40. The federal investigation formally supersedes any civil proceedings Meridian had pending against you. As of this morning, Emily, there are no active legal claims against Carter's Diner. Emily sat down in her father's chair. Say that again, she said. There are no active legal claims against Carter's Diner, Rebecca said. Clearly, deliberately, like she understood that some sentences need to be heard twice before they become real. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth, breathed through her nose, held it together mostly. Okay, she said after a moment. Her voice was mostly steady. Okay, what comes next? The federal case will take months, possibly longer. You'll likely be called to testify. I'll prepare you thoroughly for that, and Carol Hendricks will be involved given the cross-state dimension. Ryan Mercer's cooperation will be central to the prosecution's case, which means he'll face his own consequences, Emily. That process is separate from yours, but it will happen. Emily received this information about Ryan the way she'd learned to receive most things over the past months, steadily without drama, with the quiet acknowledgement that reality did not always feel the way it was supposed to feel. She had expected to feel something large when Ryan's name finally came with legal consequences attached. What she felt instead was tired, and tired was honest, and she had decided that honest was enough. And the other families, she said, David Park, the others. Carol is working with all of them, Rebecca said. Your case specifically, your father's documentation, is the evidentiary backbone for several of the other claims. Gerald Carter's filing cabinet is doing more legal work right now than most lawyers I know. Emily looked at the filing cabinet in the corner of the office. Old gray metal, slightly dented on the bottom left corner, from the time in 2011 when her father had moved it without asking for help and scraped it along the concrete step. You never know what you'll need. Rebecca, Emily said. Thank you. I mean that in a way that's larger than the word. A pause. Rebecca Sloan, who was efficient and precise and controlled, said, It has been genuinely my honor, Ms. Carter, and meant every word. Emily hung up. She sat in her father's chair for another 2 minutes. She looked at the filing cabinet. She looked at the ceiling. She talked to Gerald Carter in the way she talked to him, without sound in the space between things. We won, Dad. Not clean, not fast, not the way you'd want a thing to go, but we won. Then she stood up, straightened her apron, and went back out to run the diner. 3 days later, Sandra Park called from Boise. David heard from his attorney this morning, Sandra said. Her voice was different from the first time Emily had heard it, the 6-hour drive voice, the exhausted, prepared for more bad news voice. This voice was lighter. Not light the way things are before they've been tested. Light the way things are after. Carol told him the federal case incorporates his 18 months of documentation. His business is protected while proceedings are active, and the expectation... She stopped. Emily could hear her gathering herself on the other end of the line. The expectation is that his debt to Meridian will be voided entirely when the criminal case concludes. Sandra, Emily said. His girls don't know any of this, Sandra said. They just know Grandma came to visit and brought pie, and everything seemed a little bit better. They don't know how close it came. Her voice tightened. I keep thinking about that, about how close it came and how they'll never know. Maybe that's the point, Emily said quietly. They don't have to know. That's what we were fighting for. Sandra was quiet for a moment. You drove this, Emily. You and your father's paper trail. I need you to know that. Your son drove it for 18 months before I came along, Emily said. He just needed someone with a complete filing cabinet. Sandra laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes after a long cry, or sometimes instead of one. Come to Boise sometime, Sandra said. David wants to meet you. The girls want to meet the lady their dad keeps talking about. Tell him he should come here, Emily said. I'll make the apple pie, my father's recipe. Thursday came the way it always came, the end of the week slope, the particular quality of Thursday evening light that Emily had always found she either loved or hated, depending on what the week had held. This week she loved it. She had loved every version of Thursday evening light since the night Cole Maddox had read a 2-word note and walked out to make a phone call. He came in at the usual time. He sat at the usual stool. He ordered the usual. Emily poured his coffee and cut his pie and set them in front of him, and then instead of moving back down the counter, she stayed. She leaned against the back counter with her own coffee and looked at him. It's official, she said. Rebecca confirmed this morning. No active claims. Cole looked at his pie, then at her. Something moved in his face, small, genuine, the expression of a man who was glad and didn't quite know the most efficient way to show it. Good, he said. That's still all you've got, she said. Okay and good. What do you want me to say? I don't know. You mobilized 120 people in the middle of the night. You sat on that stool through a federal investigation. You told me it wasn't just me when I was standing in broken glass at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. She looked at him. I want to know why. The real answer, not the practical answer. He was quiet for a long moment. My sister, he said. Emily waited. She had a situation years ago before I got out of the Marines. She had a landlord who ran the same kind of play, not exactly the same, but close enough. Took her to court on a fabricated lease violation. She didn't have money for a lawyer. She didn't have anyone who knew how that system worked. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. She lost her apartment. She had 2 kids, and she lost her apartment and had to move in with our mother, and it took her 4 years to get back to where she'd been. He stopped. Nobody made the call for her. Nobody showed up. She fell through a crack that shouldn't exist, and she fell through it alone. Emily looked at him. Is she okay now? She said. Yeah, she's good. She's got a house in Spokane. Kids are in high school. He paused. She doesn't talk about that time much, but I think about it. He looked at the counter. I think about what would have been different if someone had just shown up. Emily understood then the full shape of it. Not a stranger at a counter deciding to help a stranger in trouble. A man who had spent years carrying the specific weight of a moment he couldn't go back to, and who had found on an ordinary Thursday night the chance to make a different choice in someone else's story. Cole, she said. He looked up. She's lucky to have a brother like you, she said. Even if it took her a while to get lucky. Something in his face shifted. Not the almost smile she'd come to know. Something warmer and more real than that. Something that had been there all along underneath the stillness. Don't make it into something bigger than it is, he said. It's already something bigger than it is, she said. You just don't like admitting that. He looked at his pie. Pie's getting cold, he said. She laughed. She went back to work. 2 weeks after the federal warrants, Jackson Ward came into the diner with 3 other men Emily didn't know. They sat at the long table in the back. The one she reserved for parties and large groups, the one that had Gerald Carter's initials scratched into the underside of one leg from when he'd built it himself in 1989. They ordered the full breakfast spread and ate with the comfortable appetite of men who had been up early. When they were finishing, Jackson waved Emily over. Sit down a minute, he said. She sat. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at her with the measuring attention she'd learned to trust. We've been talking, he said, the chapter, about what happened here, about what almost happened. He paused. Emily, you're not the only small business owner in this state who's had a Meridian knock on their door. You're not the only one who's going to have some version of a Meridian knock on their door in the future. These operations, they get shut down and they reconstitute. Different name, different state, same structure. Emily knew this. Rebecca had told her as much. What are you thinking? She said. We're thinking about a network, Jackson said. Something organized. Legal referrals like we did with Rebecca. Financial support for people who can't afford to fight back. A phone tree that means when someone in trouble sends out a signal, they get an answer. He looked at her steadily. We can mobilize people. That's something we know how to do. But we need people who understand the legal and financial side. People who've been through it and came out the other side and can help others understand what they're dealing with. A pause. We're asking if you'd be willing to be part of building that. Emily looked at him, then at the three men beside him, then at the diner around her, at Pete Rafferty in his booth at Tom Briggs, at the counter, at the clock above the pie case running exactly on time. She thought about Sandra Park driving 6 hours. David Park at his kitchen table at 4 in the morning. 11 families who had fallen through cracks that shouldn't exist alone, the way Cole's sister had been alone. Yes, she said, she didn't need more time than that. Jackson Ward nodded once. The men beside him nodded. It was not a ceremony and it was not a moment, and somehow that made it more significant than either of those things. Rebecca's already agreed to consult, Jackson said. Carol Hendricks is in from Boise. We've got a veterans attorney in Colorado who reached out last week. We're calling it the Carter Network. Emily stopped. You're naming it after my father, she said. We're naming it after your diner, Jackson said, which your father built, which you kept. He looked at her evenly. Seems right. She pressed her lips together, looked at the table, breathed. Yeah, she said, yeah, it does. 6 months later, Emily Carter sat in a federal courtroom in Billings and testified for 4 hours. She had been prepared by Rebecca and Carol and 2 federal prosecutors who had walked her through every question they expected and several they didn't. She had read her testimony outline until she could recite it backward. She had sat with Cole the night before in the diner after closing, drinking coffee, not talking about the testimony, talking about Caleb's first-grade teacher who apparently had opinions about snack time that Caleb found philosophically troubling. It had been exactly what she needed. On the stand, she was asked about the night Victor Kane gave her 12 minutes. She told it exactly as it happened. Flat, precise, complete, no drama added. The facts were dramatic enough on their own. She was asked about the forged signature on page 22. She described the loop on the Y. She described the moment Rebecca had shown it to her. She described what she had felt. She was asked how she had first sought help. She said, I wrote 2 words on a receipt and gave it to someone I trusted without knowing why I trusted him. The prosecutor paused at that. And what happened? He answered, Emily said. Victor Kane was convicted on 14 federal counts, including wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. His sentencing was scheduled for the following spring. Ryan Mercer, as a cooperating witness, received a reduced charge, a fact that lived in Emily's chest as an uncomfortable truth she had made her peace with because justice was not always clean, and making peace with that was part of what it cost. Dennis, the stocky man who had stood by the office door on the worst night, turned out to have his own family, his own complicated story, his own version of having fallen in with the wrong operation at the wrong time. He cooperated fully. Emily didn't forgive him exactly. She just stopped spending energy thinking about him. The debt against Carter's Diner was formally voided by the court 4 months after Emily's testimony. Rebecca called her on a Wednesday morning to tell her. Emily was in the middle of the breakfast rush. She had syrup on her apron and a full pot of coffee in her hand and 3 tables waiting. She said, Rebecca, I have customers. I know, Rebecca said. I just needed you to know today, this morning, right now. Emily stood in the middle of Carter's Diner with coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. It's done, she said. It's done, Rebecca said. Emily looked at the diner around her, at the regulars, at Pete Rafferty's crossword, at the clock above the pie case, at the window Dix and Polly had fixed so cleanly it looked better than the original, at the counter her father had built with his own hands in 1987. Thank you, Rebecca, she said. Go serve your customers, Rebecca said. And there was warmth in it, full and real. Emily put the phone in her apron pocket. She refilled the coffees. She took the orders. She kept moving. That Thursday, Cole came in at the usual time. He sat at the last stool. He ordered black coffee and apple pie. Emily poured the coffee and cut the pie and set them in front of him. Then she reached under the counter and brought out a second slice and set it on the counter for herself and sat down across from him. He looked at the second slice, looked at her. You're sitting down, he said. Slow night, she said. She ate the pie. He ate the pie. The diner hummed around them with the sounds of a place that was alive, the coffee maker, the low murmur of conversation from the back booth, Pete Rafferty's pen on his crossword, the faint noise of the highway outside carrying people from one place to another through the Montana night. Cole, Emily said. Yeah. The Carter Network had its first case last week. Woman in Missoula, widow, landscaping company coming after her property on a forged lien. She looked at her pie. Rebecca took it. Pro bono, Carol's Consulting. We had a chapter member who knew the woman's neighbor, and the neighbor made the introduction. She looked up. We caught it in week 2, before it got bad. Cole was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. This time she didn't tease him for it. Because good was the right word. Good was the exactly right, precisely sufficient, completely true word. A woman in Missoula wouldn't have to write a note on a receipt, wouldn't have to stand in her own business at midnight and count down 12 minutes, wouldn't have to learn the hard way that the system had a crack in it that people fell through alone. She would know from week 2 that someone was coming. Emily looked at the clock above the pie case. It read 9:23 at exactly 9:23. The real time as it had read every night since she climbed the stepladder with a flathead screwdriver and set it right. Her father had never gotten around to fixing it. She had. That was the smallest possible thing, and also the truest possible metaphor. And she had decided she was comfortable with both of those things being simultaneously true. Outside somewhere on the highway, a motorcycle passed the low receding sound of an engine, moving through the dark, heading somewhere, with the easy certainty of something that knew its own direction. Emily Carter sat in the diner her father built across from the man who had answered when she asked in the middle of the life she had refused to let anyone take from her and finished her pie. She had written 2 words in desperation, and the world had answered with 120. She had inherited paperwork and grief and a clock that ran slow, and she had turned them into a case, a network, a legacy, a future. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was writing 2 words on a piece of paper with shaking hands and believing, not knowing, not being sure, just believing that someone would answer. And someone had. And because someone had, someone in Missoula would not have to be alone in week 3. And because of her, and because of Sandra and David and Rebecca and Cole and Jackson and Gerald Carter's habit of never throwing anything away, neither would anyone else. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked in the quiet places where real things happen. One call, one answer, one crack in the wall that let the light in. And then slowly, stubbornly, with coffee and apple pies and tenacity spelled out in a crossword, on a Thursday night, the wall came down.